Hello, I am Commissioner Shaline Jeter. Welcome to the show, Raising the Standard. This show is brought to you by the Paducah Human Rights Commission. Before we begin, I would like to talk to you about the mission of the board. It is the purpose and policy of City of Paducah to safeguard all individuals in the city and McCracken County areas from discrimination in public facilities, housing, education, employment areas. Some areas of discrimination are race, color, disability, religion, sex, and national origin. We, the Paducah City Human Rights Commission, are sworn to protect the interests of all people in personal and dignity and freedom from humiliation. Some of the things that we do are we advocate for human and civil rights. We investigate, mediate discrimination complaints. We also provide referrals to other government agencies. We resolve community disputes and issues involving individuals or systemic illegal discrimination. We also advise the City of Paducah on human rights, and we also educate our public on the Paducah Human Rights Commission and as far as discrimination and bullying. Our co-host, Captain David White, is unfortunately unable to be here today. So therefore, we have our chairperson, Dr. Bernice Belt. Dr. Belt, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Jeter, and I appreciate you and Commissioner White giving me permission to come on and co-host with you this segment of PHRC, Raising the Standard television show. We are proud of our television show, and we are certainly appreciative of all of the comments and emails and text messages and private messages and posts and things, even on Facebook, encouraging us and telling us what a great show it is. They appreciate our guests and the topics and all the good work that the people here at WKCTC television studio are doing on a daily basis. And so Executive Director Tom Butler, John Walker, Dan Shepard, Brad Abernathy, they are outstanding, and they make us look and sound gooder than we are. I want you to know that. Well, our special guest, and again, we like to say special because they are all special, is Family Circuit Court Judge Cynthia Sanderson, right here in the great Paducah, McCracken County area. And welcome, Judge.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you, and thank you for saying yes. I know people will be familiar with you because they've probably seen you on some of the other shows here at the government channel, Channel 11, out of WKCTC. But also, this will be the first time you've been with us, and the topic for today is juvenile bullying. And we want everybody to relax and sit back and really pay close attention to this, because these are things that you as parents or caregivers or other professionals, you need to know about these things. And just when we think we know all that we need to know about something, we learn that we really don't. And that's why Judge Sanderson is with us today. What do you think about that, Judge?
Well, it sounds like a big bill for me to fill, but I'll do my best.
Well, if you don't mind, I will read a formal definition of bullying, and then you just take it from there and know that this is your segment, and you just flow any way that you want to, because we expect to get a whole lot smarter by the time we're finished here today. Bullying is formally defined as the use of force, threat, or coercion to abuse, intimidate, or aggressively impose domination over others. The behavior is often repeated and habitual. One essential prerequisite is the perception of the bully or others of an imbalance of social or physical power. And behaviors used to assert such domination can include verbal harassment or threat, physical assault or coercion, and such acts may be directed repeatedly towards particular targets. And so we'll leave it right there, Judge, and then you break that down and help us with those little nuances the way that you feel would be best.
Okay. That's a great definition. I think it encompasses every part of any definition that I'd try to propose as being useful. But basically, bullying is picking on somebody repetitively with the intention of being harmful to the person, and somehow trying to be perceived as more powerful. I think the two main elements that you pointed out are the the perceived control or being in a position of control, either thinking you are or being perceived as you are. And then also the repetitiveness of it. If it just happens once, it's probably not bullying. It's just a one-time deal. Bullying is repetitive. But most kids will come home and say, Mom, he's picking on me again,
Right.
and it made me cry, and it hurt my feelings. There's a good chance that is a form of bullying as we know it. When children say that, that's often the first clue that there may be some bullying going on. More often than not, parents will not hear the definition you gave just then from their children, that is what has gone on at school. So the first thing we need to know is listen to your children about what they're saying, because they won't define it just the way you did. It's in a much simpler form. They said bad things about me. They hurt my feelings, or he got me in a corner and tried to threaten me or hurt me. And that's the second time. He did it yesterday too. Things like that. So when you hear it, the repetitiveness and the feeling that they're trying to make your child feel a lesser person than the bullier, the bullying person, I think those are signs.
We were talking earlier, the three of us, about how juvenile bullying is a gateway to adult bullying. And when you think about the definition and when you think about the things that you see come before you in the courtroom, what are some of the similarities that you find between the juvenile bully and the adult bully?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I find a lot of different similarities. In my courtroom, I notice that a child, more often than not, is being the victim of bullying when they come into my courtroom. My courtroom is family court, and oftentimes they will not be going to school, or they have status offenses where they're out of control at home, they're not following the rules or something. So a lot of those children are victims themselves. Unfortunately, as they go through the system, they may transform over to be the perpetrator of the bullying. On the other hand, there's a good chance that those same victims are being bullied in their own home. Yet again, I know that may be different from what the adult version communicated, but I find that if you're being bullied at home, maybe even by your parents,
Yes.
that you can either become a bully later on, or you can become a victim later on. It depends on a different your perception of the whole events. It's kind of like domestic violence. Sometimes people who are victims of domestic violence will go on to be perpetrators, or they can continue to be victims. And that, however that pans out, it's very complicated. I can't really explain it here in a few minutes, nor explain it well under any circumstances. But there's a lot of psychological events going on there that cause that transformation from childhood bullying or being a victim into what they grow up to be.
I can understand that. A child that grows up in that's all they know.
Yes.
So as an adult, that's what they know.
Yes.
But are there programs in place to intervene with families?
There are, of course, the schools have, the best of my knowledge, they are taking a front line on trying to prevent and work on this problem in the school setting. When we hear about it and it comes into the court system, there's a different element we try to deal with. At first we try to divert it away from the court system. They go through what we call the CDW's office, which is a diversion program. It's court designated worker. It's an acronym for court designated worker. And they will, those folks at that office will work with the children and the families. They set up workbooks that they have. In fact, I have a copy of a workbook that sets out lessons for the for the child and family
Right.
to work on to try to identify and help them stop the bullying. And these are the perpetrators now. They also may send them to an anger management program. They will send them to some other educational work, and that's the harassment and harassing communications, which is also a form of bullying. Keeping in mind that children that bully may be prosecuted for harassment or harassing communications as juveniles, so they kind of overlap. We call it bullying, but when it gets into the court system, it's not really bullying. It's a different, it's a crime. It's harassment, harassing communications. It could be, if you're the victim, oftentimes it's because you may be in status court for not wanting to go to school. So I'm seeing it on both sides, where they're being victimized as well as being the perpetrator.
Well, that's interesting, I think, for the viewing audience, is that when it gets to the court level, it's not called bullying, it's called harassment. And when you look at the definitions for harassment, sexual harassment, bullying, abuse, you see this relationship between those definitions, and they are overlapping so much.
Right.
When it comes to harassment and when it comes to sexual harassment, as I have been sexually harassed and I have been bullied, and I found very little difference between the person who bullied me and the person who sexually harassed me. There were so many similarities, it was almost like looking at the same person in two different bodies. It was kind of a strange experience. And all of those control methods and the domination type methods of operation, they were all similar, just two age groups.
Right.
When the children come before you, and I guess I still have to call them children, being a mommy and a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, sorry, had to throw that in. When I think about my children, I think of them in terms of how they have to deal with the realities of life. Some of the initiatives I'm aware that you've done in the past, if I'm not mistaken, you even had a program that involved adoption at one point, and I remember a program that was given at Washington Street Baptist, I think, where you were the keynote speaker and you talked about families taking and adopting, or at least being a foster parent of abused children. Would you like to share a little bit about that, and then maybe any other initiatives that you've been involved in or that you led in our community?
Well, presently, you may be speaking about an Adoption Day program several years back. Of course, we are always in need of foster parents in this community. There are lots of children that have to be farmed out, so to speak, to other counties when they have to be removed from their home because of abuse or neglect. And it's bad enough for a child to have to be removed from their home setting, their parents or parent or their caretaker that they've been used to. It's bad enough that they have to be removed from that home that they've been used to, but to remove them from their community and their school, at least if we had more foster homes in this community, they could stay in this community. I think that was one of the initiatives I was trying to pursue then. Right now we have a program, or I have a program with Richard Abraham, who is phenomenal with children. I mean, I get so excited talking about Mr. Abraham and how he interacts with children. He helps me with children that are in the court system for being out of control or truant. And it's called Mental Transitions. He came up with the program himself. He created the whole thing. He packaged it. He's producing it.
How about that?
He does it, and the kids love it. What it does, and you should have him on for him to more
sitting here thinking
fully
the same thing.
explain this. But he helps children think about what their behaviors do and what their judgments do to their future, how they can mentally transform their life and transition their life into being a better person. And he goes from point A to point B in such a fabulous way with these kids. It's just unbelievable. And it really does help them. It's amazing. He takes about, 6 to 8 to 10 kids for about 6 weeks, meets at the courthouse in my courtroom once a week for several hours, and they really get down and have some really good conversations about their lives and where they can go with it. And then he follows up with them. So it's a great program that he does with them. It's his program. It's not mine. He just helps me out.
That's good to
by
know.
taking the kids that come out of my court.
Well, I'm sure you appreciate it.
Oh,
You can't do it
that's
all
good
by
to know.
yourself.
So much, so much. I can't say enough about that program, but we have other programs. We try to, of course, we're always trying to send children to get help through counseling and anger management and different things like that. Adults, of course, that come through domestic violence, we do require them to have anger management to try to, or domestic violence treatment. For the victims, we always like to see them go to talk to someone at the Merriman House about the cycle of violence and how to stop that, because it just seems so repetitive.
Judge, would you say that juvenile bullying, or as we really know, it's really harassment, would you say that the children often, well, I guess, would you say that the children feel so helpless that they internalize everything, and there's only one way that it comes out most of the time, and that is in a violent or an implied violent sort of way? The
children that are the bulliers?
That are bullied and that are the bullies.
All right. You know, I guess it depends on the emotional constitution of a child and how he perceives or she perceives the bullying. And of course, we all hope that we send our children off to school emotionally strong and able to deal with whatever confronts them on a given day. But the fact of the matter is that we don't. And because they're not able to, and they should not have to tolerate it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that they should. They deal with the bullying in a way, children are different, but in a way that that sometimes results in some self-destructive behavior. Sometimes it's cutting. Sometimes we've even heard of children committing suicide. We've heard of children withdrawing, emotionally withdrawing, not only, and I see that a lot because they're emotionally withdrawing from school, and then eventually they physically withdraw from school. They shut down. And so when I see them in truancy court or in my court for being truant, it's because they didn't want to deal with it anymore. So more often than not, they shut down. They just don't want to deal with the circumstance that confronts them.
Judge Sanderson, when you know that the child's root problem or the initial issues with the children are the parents themselves, how do you approach that in order to get those children the help that they need, the intervention that they need?
Well, of course, if the root problem is the parent, there's a number of ways that I can approach it. I bring in the social services to intervene, along with some intervention procedures, including, well, we wrap our arms around these families. We try to by placing different agencies in the home to try to help these parents understand what they're doing to the child, and how they can better their parenting skills and get them parenting and show them different ways of parenting to improve that child's circumstance. But when it gets to the point when those initiatives are not beneficial and they're not working, and the behavior continues such that the child is being detrimentally affected and endangered, then the next step is finding some place, a relative to take over, or in the worst scenario, the very worst scenario, it would have to be really bad, the child would actually be removed.
Well,
Is it?
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, okay. Is it prevalent to have generations of this happening?
That's usually what
the
it
case?
is.
Just
It's like
generations back?
behaviors are, for the most part, learned. They are mostly learned. There's a few behaviors that are not learned. I can think of a couple of unlearned behaviors. It's, for instance, I think when a baby hears a noise,
Right.
really early, that's their first response, their first fear or something. Noise, high noises or loud noises scare babies. Okay, that's probably not a learned behavior, that jerking. That's an innate response. But those types of behaviors are rare. Most behaviors in children and adults are learned. Now, where is their first education? Where do they get their first education? They get it from their parents, from their environment.
Absolutely.
And until there is a formal education intervention, i.e. Kindergarten, first steps, whatever it is, or maybe daycare, then that opportunity for learning is huge at home, huge. So by the time they're in kindergarten or go to first steps, they've already learned so many behaviors that may be in the line of bullying. Self-preservation.
Yes.
You know, they've watched it. They've bullied their siblings. They've been bullied.
Right.
They've watched their parents bully other people. They may have watched their parents bully their mother or their mother bully.
Well, this may be from left field, but I've heard comments of people that feel like violence is promoted in video games, the media. Do you think that affects the juveniles today? Do you think it's almost like it's a normal thing to hit somebody because you see it everywhere?
I think that video games have gotten way out of hand. I do. I mean, I gotta tell you that, and I'm sure there is a whole group of people who totally disagree and claim that there is no basis for me making this statement. But if you can't say anything else, this is the bottom line. We should not be raising our children in front of a TV or a video game.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so when we delegate that responsibility to something like a video game, then we've already failed as a parent.
Absolutely.
And then we start investigating what it is that's teaching our children. And if that's those violent video games, then yes, they are learning those things. Children absorb and learn so much at an early age. It is unbelievable the amount of education that a child can get at such an early age. I don't know about you ladies, but I've tried to learn some skills lately. It's not easy for me. It's not easy.
It's not easy.
You know, if I were a child all over again, I would have learned a language, an extra language, maybe my first language better. I would have learned to fly. I would have learned to play the piano. I would have learned to have done a lot of things that I want to do today that I find so difficult. But as a child, it's so easy to pick up.
Yes.
So it doesn't take watching them repetitively like it does as an adult. They can get it quickly. And if it's normal watching, if it's normal viewing, if around your house you're saying words and saying things and exposing your children to things that you shouldn't be, then it becomes normal. It is a culture. When we talk about culture, we often think of it as a good thing. And most cultures have some very good things.
That's right.
But when we're exposing our children to drug cultures, violent culture, culture where women are being mistreated, or you know, parents aren't being parents, or we have absent fathers, those are not good things of our culture. Those are not the premier things we want to pass on to the next generation. You see what I'm
I understand.
getting at?
I totally
So,
understand.
So we have to remember that we are role models for our children in every second of our day. And if we do not present the best role model, they were going to go on into the world presenting that model that you presented them. And it may even be worse it may get worse along the way, unless there's some intervention. So if we can model ourselves to our children in a way that we want them to grow up and be productive, positive citizens.
And it's very important for parents to accept responsibility for all of their obligations as parents. We don't know everything. Even after a little education, we still don't know everything. And it's so important, I believe, is that we simply admit that we don't know everything we need to know and get help. If you don't know where to start somewhere.
Right.
And get help and have someone else to teach you and to mentor you on how to raise your children. It's clear, Judge Sanderson, that you practice a great deal of empathy, of compassion, and deep-seated concern in the handling of things in your courtroom, and it's very much appreciated. It's a wonderful thing that people can see you and others and not be afraid of you, but to appreciate what you do and why you do it, why you're there, and then begin to have some empathy in their own lives and their own connections with other people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I got to confess that's not always the case. In fact, I was telling the ladies that I work with at the courthouse today that I probably am guilty of bullying in my own courtroom sometimes when I feel like, of course, I realize that I'm perceived in a position of power.
Right.
As I said, in a courtroom. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be technically.
Yes.
But oftentimes, if you start defining that, using that definition of bullying, when I go a little overboard, I can see where I can sometimes. Of course, as a law student, as lawyers, we're trained in the art of bullying. No
Yes.
question about it.
Exactly.
Well,
So-
I would think that when it comes to crime, there ought to be some dominance practiced in the courtroom.
That's right.
So that we can keep order.
Yeah.
That we don't want the wild, wild west
No,
anymore.
no, and I'm not suggesting that I'm gonna succumb to being too nice, but
Well, Judge Sanderson, we appreciate you being on the show, and we hope to bring you back in the next several months and catch up and do some things, because we could easily do an hour show. Is there one last thing you would like to say, because we are winding down and we appreciate you?
well, I think it's really important as parents that we listen to our children, and we not only need to listen for their victimization, just as importantly, we need to listen to make sure they're not victimizing other people, because you as a parent have an obligation to try to intervene and stop that. And by all means, get on the internet. There's all kinds of information about keys and what to talk to your children about when they're either victims or perpetrators of bullying. So look it up. There's lots of resources out there.
That's a great way to end this segment. Commissioner Jeter, what would you like to say signing off?
Well, I just want to say, if anybody has any problems or questions or concerns about bullying, please don't hesitate to contact our office at 300 South 5th Street, or you can go on the website, paducahky.gov. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.